Welcome to the next wave of digital video. I'm your host, Tony Reale.
And I'm Ben Carlson.
And today we're really excited to be joined by the creative team of Fogtown. Now, you guys may have noticed if you've been watching our channel for a little while, we've been on a bit of a kick for virtual productions. We're really excited about the future that this is bringing, both for our creative capabilities within our production company and really what it's doing to revolutionize all sorts of productions across the world. When I came across Fogtown on the Unreal users group on Facebook, I was really enamored with both the way they were using the technology and also just frankly the content that they were creating with it. It's such a great little show that we're excited to talk to them about, and also to help promote for their crowdfunding that they're doing right now. So be sure to check that out. I'll let them give you more details on that, but I'm going to hand it off to their creative team and let them introduce themselves.
I'm Sean. I am one of the two main creators, directors, writers of the show, alongside Austin Hillebreck.
Which is me. I am Austin Hillebreck, and I am one of the creators of the show, writers, directors. I also play the role of Bloxon.
And he's crafted the vast majority of the 3D assets that power the show currently.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of sort of a critical thing to note.
I forgot about that. That whole thing.
And this fellow over here is kind of our maestro of Unreal.
My name's Dylan Wainwright, and I'm the director of virtual production, often called the virtual production supervisor. And I joined recently. I saw some of their promo stuff and just fell in love, and so I'm a recent addition to the crew.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, guys. You know, when we first started getting to virtual production, you know, we've been trying to find ways to incorporate it into our workflow. So we're using an ultra short throw projector, and you know, we're limited by the framework that we can. So let's ask you, like, what was your reason behind choosing virtual production for your show?
It kind of all stems back to the basically why the show looks the way it does and the way we've been creating it. So like the show has been in development for 10 years at least, but it's only in the last 2 or 3 years that it's really kind of skyrocketed as far as like actual work on it goes. And it was mainly because of the pandemic. When we all got locked down, me and Sean were trying to figure out how ways that we can still work on something together and be creative in a world where we can't be in the same room together. And the idea of making something that was all done sort of remotely, where I'm making backgrounds and then sending them to Sean, and Sean can put a puppet in front of it and you know, act out various scenes and stuff, was like, oh, this is like the perfect way to create this show. It actually lends itself to the style of the show that we had been talking about for so long. So that's kind of the genesis of like why we did it the way we have, and it's only been in the last, I wanted to say, year or so where we were thinking, because virtual production's been blowing up right now, and so we wanted to get it pushed into that realm. So there's only so much you can do when you pre-render your backgrounds, you know, as opposed to having everything happening live on the set. There's so much more. It just feels like you're actually there. You're actually filming a real set. So
now, one thing that I've really been interested in just kind of watching the content you guys have put out so far, is how you've mixed a lot of practical sets. And I mean, we can see, Dylan, you got part of the rooftop where you guys shot some of the scenes already. I'm just kind of geeking out seeing that already. But then looking at some of the behind the scenes and how you've incorporated some of the CG and Unreal, how have you been able to tie in kind of the practical and the virtual production?
Well, I think that's sort of the whole key, right? I mean, foreground elements really help to sell the immersion experience in a virtual production. And so that was immediately on my mind, is like how to incorporate that, how to get that parallax. And as far as the backgrounds, Austin has given me some amazing assets to work with. And so I personally myself built these guys because, you know, I wanted to play around with that. And I think the main thing that's benefited is just really the concept. I mean, because you know the problem with an LED setup is or the problem you can run into sometimes is get that separation, right? Where you feel like literally it's something in front. So a big job of mine is to really meld the foreground and the backgrounds together so they feel cohesive, yeah.
And how fortunate that we picked an aesthetic that lets people just dig into the recycling bin and put paint on it, and it's like, oh, that matches all this 3D work that Austin's been doing.
You know, I want to talk about that because how much, you know, you mentioned that Fogtown is something that you've been working on for many years now. How much of the aesthetic was birthed out of virtual production as the workflow that you decided to work with, and how much was that already a predetermined thing before you even came to virtual production?
The aesthetic of it being cardboard didn't exist 2 years ago. That was a new thing, and the virtual production followed suit pretty soon after that. We had been originally thinking about this show as live actors with big silly costume box heads running around in like either real sets or like rear projected super old school type stuff. But this was like before The Mandalorian came out. We didn't realize that there was a way to use like non-rendered technology to make that happen on the horizon. So now that it's here, like we've kind of leaned into it even more just because speed of asset creation when we're doing like 3D sets made of cardboard is, we've found it's refreshingly fast. When we're making these rooms, like the wall paneling, we can model that. We can put depth into it if we want, or we can take a flat plane and take a digital Sharpie and go blah, 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 and it's 90% as effective for just conveying what the idea is. So the whole thing is just kind of like, this is 3D, this is digital, but what if we're pretending it's all taking place inside of like this cardboard diorama that a precocious kid threw together at the last minute for a school project, and it's not really wrapped in that meta layer, but in our heads it might be. That's kind of our guiding principle of like, are we doing too much? Are we putting too much effort into this asset? It has to be something that a kid could have conceivably crafted, I guess.
And you know, that's I love hearing that, because like that's, you know, when you're creating that world, you have to have like some sort of brand guidelines, for lack of a better word. Like you have to decide, all right, this is how real something can look. And you know, like, so what kind of tools are you working with? Like I was looking at some of the heads, and it looked like I could see some layer lines. Or are you 3D printing some of the stuff?
Yeah, we're the all of the assets are being created in Blender, textured in Substance Painter. I didn't know how to use any of those programs when I started doing this. Like I'm an animator in my career, freelance animator, so I've mostly had experience with Maya. But as far as like modeling and texturing, lighting, rendering, all that stuff, it was stuff that I had done years ago, long time ago in Maya. And Blender was always that one thing I was always like, I should get around to learning that. It's free. I feel like I'm wasting an asset here by not learning it. And then when it came time to make this show, it was kind of the perfect excuse to sort of throw myself into Blender and learn how to use it. So all the environments are made in there. The puppets too, we are 3D printing the puppet heads and various props we've 3D printed as well. And then, yeah, lately I've been, once Dylan came on board, I would just take everything I made and just throw it at him and and say like, good luck, you know, which I'm so glad that we got him on board, because we knew we were going into Unreal at some point to move all of this over there. And there was a time when I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to have to learn Unreal now. Like it just feel like I just wrapped my head around Blender, and I'm gonna have to start from scratch on this whole new program. And Dylan really like cut out a lot of in between steps. Like he already had a head start on me, which was such a help. Like I'm still learning Unreal, but like to have someone who's already got some experience under their belt was, yeah, just a huge help in that way.
So when you guys are filming, are you all working together, or are you working remotely?
It's a mix. So Austin's been in LA the entire time that Fogtown has been in development. We shoot in Portland, Oregon, and everyone else is on set, like working with the puppets, getting the screen set up, managing Unreal. Austin sometimes will zoom in, but we have enough of a shared kind of vision of what the show is that I can often just kind of handle that, and we have our meetings beforehand to just ensure we're on the same page about, you know, anything. And we are, or we aren't, but we like the other person's idea so much that we don't care that we're two different people, and we say, yeah, sure, go for it.
To make a little point about working remotely, in a weird way, a silver lining about this pandemic is that it really has kind of forced the issue of people learning how to do it. And I was fortunate enough to be part of a real-time short challenge by John McKennis about 2 years ago. And I was working with a crew in Chile, and we were doing it all remote. You know, we had our shoot here in Portland, but all of the 3D and stuff was going through that. This was before I had a lot of knowledge in Unreal. And I mean, virtual production just lends itself really well to remote work. It's great. And it's sort of a whole new field of production in a way. So I just wanted to interject that.
Yeah,
And Dylan, also you got the official hands-on training for many weeks as an Unreal Fellowship recipient, which was hugely beneficial to like what you're bringing to the table now for us.
It was a great opportunity. I did that in fall of 20. I think I was the second or third fellowship group. And yeah, it was great. It was 5 weeks. It was really my first real introduction to Unreal. I had dabbled in it before that. I mean, like literally just dabbled, but doing 5 weeks of pretty much, you know, like 10, 12, 14 hours a day, just kind of going balls out. I you know, got a quick education. So that was really helpful. My first real encounter with virtual production, believe it or not, was in 1988. And I was in college, I was in my 20s, and I was a theater major, but I was really into video. And at that time, as you guys know, this was all analog video, and this is back in the 80s, all analog, and I had a director, a woman that I knew that was a teacher at the school, that decided she wanted to do sort of a multimedia version of The Tempest. It was a live play, but we had 2 cameras, 2 computers, and a switcher on stage, and we were projecting mixed images on screens behind the actors to sort of add to the mystique of the island and the whole, you know, the puck and everything like that, and to give it some magic. And you know, it wasn't the greatest production, but I really have to say that it was amazing that this woman in 1988 was already really starting to think about how to integrate computers in live action. It was really fascinating. But really what started me on the adventure was the film Oblivion with Tom Cruise. That was my initial introduction to Lux Machina. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with them. And I was blown away as someone who's immensely interested in lighting and photography. I was just blown away by the skies. I mean, it's like, how did they do that? How did they get those reflections? You know, it's just gorgeous. And I know enough about green screen and all that kind of stuff that I was just, you know, blown away. So I had to research that and find out how they actually shot it. And that's how I discovered Lux Machina. And then, you know, as time progressed, I was following things, and then, you know, in 2019, they had that motorcycle demo that Unreal did, Matt Workman, you know, that thing, and that, you know, that just increased my intensity and excitement for the whole thing. And then in 20, I did the fellowship, And once I was finished with the fellowship, starting in January of 21, when we were still really, under COVID, I just went all in on learning all of the techniques of virtual production, learning how to track cameras, all that, all on a really low budget scale. I mean, obviously out of my living room. I was, starting out with my Canon T2i with a tracker, right? I have the trackers on our other camera right now, but just real janky jig type of thing. As a matter of fact, the first tests that I did were all with that. And then we did the real-time shorts challenge, the first one that was in 2020, and that was a real experience. And so yeah, I've just been. I actually let me say this. So in the last several months, let's say the last 6 months, my VP knowledge was getting to a point where I was really ready to do a project, but I didn't have any ideas. I just creatively, I think I spent too much time on the tech side, so I was a little bit creatively blocked. And Sean and I and Austin, we've known each other for years, but we've really never worked together a bunch. And I started seeing their posts for Fogtown. They would show clips where they were using a static background, but the backgrounds were gorgeous, the ones that Austin were creating. And I knew Austin, and I knew when I started to hear that he was using Blender, which I love Blender. That's where I got started in 3D. And Blender is sort of, I love Unreal, but Blender's my baby, you know what I mean? That's where I started out, and I have a big affinity for Blender and the whole open source. It's kind of what led me into Unreal, that you can actually download Unreal for free too. But yeah, so I saw their stuff, and just, as you guys have said, and as you know, it's so joyful and creative and original and interesting. And it's like, that's the project I have to work on. And so I reached out to Sean and said, hey, please bring me aboard. So that's sort of my, and one other thing, the smaller scale is great for low budget. It takes a lot of pressure off, because we're using a basic Vive system right now, jitter hasn't really been an issue. It's actually been a lot easier than trying to do some of the full scale tests that I did.
I definitely want to go more over your workflow, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But backing up to talking about, I do want to go a little bit more about that creative process where you guys, we talked about the cardboard aesthetic that you went through. But I mean, were there any other stages? Did you guys think about maybe doing stop motion at one point, or what made you decide to go with the live action puppetry?
There was a point, it didn't last long, where in my head I was like, man, we've been trying to make this thing happen for a decade. It keeps going to the back burner, but we keep bringing it out and developing the story and the characters and wanting to make it, but it's not getting made because it's too hard. Like, what do we have to do? Do we have to switch it to a cartoon, do full 2D animated? And we were kind of kicking that around for a hot minute before deciding, no, we want it to have the live action feel. We want it to feel tangible and something that you can actually poke and has the real physics. And as it happened, my mother-in-law makes finger puppets, and we had in our attic a plastic bin of about 500 of them that she had been making to sell at little crafts fairs for $5 a pop. And they're gorgeous. They got way more detail in the painting than you'd ever think would be possible at that scale. And so our task was to, when we had time, which that never exists, photograph all of them and put them on Etsy and sell them on our behalf, and just hadn't gotten around to it. But I was they're out the back of my mind of we got these finger puppets, and what if we did something with puppetry with all the skill and technique we've honed in the last couple decades as filmmakers, and kind of went back to basics. When we started out with VHS camcorders, waving around our action figures in real time in front of the camera and doing silly voices, what could we do on that scale with puppets now? And we decided to do a little test where, kind of by chance, I happened into an opportunity on the internet, had a very interesting conversation, or just a deranged argument that I fully take equal responsibility for with a stranger. Where the way that the argument started unfolding, I realized I just had to take a step back, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is so absurd. Like, this is a script. And so I asked him, hey, can I turn our like discussion about how you don't believe that this person's story is real and me saying it's totally real, can I take that, turn it into a little finger puppet short? And then he relentlessly was like, yes, and you better follow through. And he hounded me for days. And I made the mistake of offhandedly being like, expect it by the end of the week. And he's like, every day checking in, being like, where is it? And I'm like, I'm trying to make it. I'm actually had the intention of following through, because I knew we needed some sort of proof of concept of like, what's it like if we try to do cinematic, telephoto, macro, cool stuff with puppets. And it just took on this whole new layer of like the stress of trying to make it in an absurd time frame that had no like sensibility behind the deadline, but it was there and I wanted to make it in time. So I brought in Austin to voice act as me, and he just improvised this whole extra layer that was beyond the script of the argument, about freaking out about trying to make the finger puppet short as a finger puppet. And
Very meta.
It turned into this thing, like literally from the moment that I agreed to make it to the point that it got uploaded on YouTube was 5 days, and it's a 12-minute long thing. And it really resonated with people. A lot of corners of Reddit were like very taken by it and thought it was kind of like the purest distillation of what that website is and how ridiculous everyone who has an account there is. And so
Great.
that ended up kind of like,
Oh,
it was like a proof of concept for finger puppetry that took on its own life, and we realized, oh, we might have to make some more stuff of of this too.
amazing. I can think of no better way to mitigate an argument than saying, hey, do you mind if I turn this into a puppet, like a finger puppet show? Because what argument are you going to have there? Like
honestly, yeah, when I did that, we never touched on the original like form of the fight again. It was a left turn, very hard left turn.
Gotta hold that in my back pocket.
Yeah, I was
next
gonna
time.
say.
Yeah. And like, for someone who came across as being like a total jerk to me, and I'm sure right back at him from my POV, making the short and sending it to him, and him like thoroughly approving of the end result, and us becoming like essentially pen pals for several months after, is like, that kind of gives me some hope for humanity. If like I can have a stupid argument and then like have like
Make art out of it.
this
Right.
friendship with this guy from another country who I only know from our just weird DMs and public comments, is like, that's really something. Yeah. So
Well, I want to ask you about your character faces, because from animation work to miniature to puppet to all I've watched a lot of stop motion animation and things like Aardman's work, and I can only imagine the challenge that you guys must go through when you're trying to establish like how much do we put in there, like how detailed are the eyes, do we have a mouth, do all those factors. Could you take us through that, a little bit of that workflow as well?
we can. I mean, the work that goes into that aspect is by and large attributable to a person who is not with us today on this call. Her name is Devin Rawlings, and she's our co-writer and kind of headed up all the puppet fabrication so far, with her partner Phelan, who does the 3D printing of the heads. She takes the heads, paints them, makes the costumes, does all the little hairdressing and stuff, just really intricate detail work, all based off of concept drawings that Austin is providing as a reference.
So Austin, how did you get to the point where you decided how much detail or how little detail you want to have to allow the characters to emote, but also to stay within the constraints of what you're aiming for with that aesthetic?
Yeah, it was I mean, it kind of always goes back to that sort of that higher level design mission statement. I don't even know what you call it. Design standard of like, this is a 13-year-old kid who designed all of this. Like it kind of always keeps coming back to that. And knowing that the whole thing would be sort of this simplified cardboard aesthetic in the world, I wanted the characters to be somewhat simplified or feel sort of like a halfway between like a Muppet, a Jim Henson Muppet, and something that feels more like a Punch and Judy, you know, stick puppet kind of thing. That and for me, when it came to like, what do you keep as far as a facial feature goes, like eyes to me are, we don't need a mouth to emote. You need the eyes are everything, the eyes and the eyebrows. So that just made sense to keep that. And then it was also more of a practical decision too, of if we have mouths, then we have to like, well, do you do a mouth flap when people are talking, or do you just have static expressions? And it just added this layer that was kind of like, it just feels like extra work. Like a lot of the design decisions on this project have been like balancing that, like, how hard is this going to be to do, and also like what
do we gain from it?
Yeah, what do we gain from it? How can we streamline it as much as possible, not get caught up in the technical stuff, and get to the sort of creating it as quick as possible.
Yeah, if I could make an analogy real quick, I am a huge fan of Legos. And one thing I love about Legos is this sort of, you have the free form of the bricks, but there's also little detail pieces that sometimes are a bit more detailed. And if you look in our sets, generally everything's, you know, sort of that cardboard aesthetic, but there's little things like lamps and things like that that just have a little bit more real world feel, that sort of, it's like you're in this tiny world, but it's still a big world, right? And that's entirely Austin. That's your aesthetic. That's just amazing. I love it.
So I guess that's a great point too. Is like how much of this are you limiting to what would actually be in real scale to that, and how much of it do you have to take like a real item and just shrink it down and be like, well, it's just a mini version of that item that would never actually exist in the real world?
It's, yeah, kind of a weird blend of the two, because as I was building things in Blender, I was trying to build it to real life scale, and pretending that the puppets were 6 feet tall and that they were living in this world that was the one-to-one to our world. But it was just, but then knowing that this is all actually going to get shrunken down to puppet size. Yeah, it was and it was also like sort of a practical thing too, of like knowing that we were going to recreate some of these either props or set pieces in real life with like 3D printing or fabricating out of cardboard. I knew that whatever got designed in CG needed to be easily replicated in real life with just whatever anyone had in the recycling bin. So that also really helped sort of guide like how simple something should be. And I really want, I mean, we've done it a little bit of creating this world where you've got practical elements in front of the screen. But moving forward, like in the future, like I want to push that even further so that the line gets blurred even more, kind of like what Dylan was saying, you know, previously, just as much as possible, getting, you know, as much like cardboard elements that the puppets are interacting with, and then using the virtual production, like dream scope for this show, we would have like full on cardboard sets that the puppets are in, and the virtual production is almost like the exterior of it's what's out the window of the buildings, and there's a world going on, a life happening outside there, and we're just using the virtual production as set extension, you know, instead of set replacement,
Mm.
you know.
And I'll be honest though, like I think you guys have still done an amazing job, even within the just using it as the set. Like I think you blended the two together so well that it doesn't feel like it's, it feels very natural.
Thank
And
you.
so that is a great example of marrying that style with the asset creation, and then and great capture.
Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to mention too, or ask you about, was like where I can only imagine there was probably some creative decision making, but behind how to articulate the arms and stuff like that. I don't know if you're familiar with VeggieTales, but like I know like when they decided like, all right, the characters aren't going to have any arms, now we have to have rules for the universe. How do they pick things up and stuff like that? Could you guys talk about that a little bit as well?
Sure. We did consider at one point, what if there's no arms and we just have props on sticks floating around? And yeah, very, very, close approximation to VeggieTales. And in the finger puppet short that I made with the argument, it was kind of that style too, where the puppets just didn't have arms. But we thought that if we could do something that was had a little bit more articulation, that just kind of gave it this little extra spark of magic and life, that it would just kind of be a little bit more exciting and inspiring to viewers who are seeing something on a small scale that they don't normally get to see moving like that.
Did you have to make the decision or about whether you're going to do wire removal or just straight up leave those on?
We had that conversation for about 5 seconds and it was a hard no.
Speaking as someone who's done plenty of rotoscoping, I was like, no, thank you. No rotoscoping.
And again, I think the design aesthetic matches that beautifully. Like
Yeah.
it's not distracting to have it in there. And that goes back to kind of building that world, building those rules within the world, and using the limitation to say, this is our rules and these are the aesthetic choices we're going to continue with.
Well, I think it's interesting that you guys kind of have that magic to difficulty balance, and it's kind of like, all right, we gain the magic by having the articulated arms, but we don't lose any of that magic by just having some of the wires that it's acceptable to have in there. We still keep that magic because we don't want to go through all the process. And I think that's
Yeah.
kind of a cool lens to be able to balance out the creative process through.
It is, and it helps when you see so many people like singing the praises of like Aardman animation and being like, I like that you see the fingerprints in the claymation characters. People like to be able to see the touch that the artists have on it. And so hearing that from people gives us like the confidence to be like, okay, people will be okay with us having some pretty endearingly rough edges around this.
Yeah.
Like it's not gonna make or break the production by any means.
All right, so I got to ask, what made you guys decide to go with Sherlock Holmes as your world that you're building?
Great question. My favorite genre has always been, like, at heart, mystery. I love a good mystery. I was raised on mysteries. My parents loved mysteries. Got so many memories of just my early TV viewing experiences, watching Sherlock and Poirot and Rumpole and all that great British slow-paced, cozy, nefarious crime stuff. Is great. I look back on that stuff and I think warm, fuzzy childhood feelings. So the Sherlock in particular was compelling as a thematic starting point for this, because there's everyone knows about Sherlock, and Sherlock is kind of the template for the detective with crippling social problem genre that everyone tries to follow suit in. And it's just a great base to build from. Like, just the pairing of those two characters in particular, it's like the most legendary mystery pairing because of their differences, but also in their overlaps in philosophy. And so we thought, what a great base to build off of, to tell a story that's, really about friendship and growth and the trials and tribulations of maintaining that kind of relationship while high stakes, crazy external stuff is unfolding all around you. It's everything Austin and I write these days draws from our history of working together for 20 years and kind of being, our ride or die filmmaking partner. And so just more and more of that is, leaking into our creative stuff, whether it's intended or not. And this one, it's very much intended. And Sherlock and Watson's relationship has just always resonated with me so deeply, and the numerous reinterpretations of it that have also been, faithful and yet unique and have their own kind of fun slants. And this is just us contributing one more attempt into that pile of Sherlock inspired or Sherlock reinterpretations that we hope will kind of have a legacy of its own.
Did you feel that, or was there any point where you're deciding if you wanted to do your own original IP, or is there a reason that you felt that Sherlock was the best direction to go?
There was.
Yeah, we were actually, before we jumped onto Fogtown full steam ahead, all our eggs in Fogtown basket, me and Sean were developing another script for a feature that was an original story. And the longer we worked on that script, the more Sean especially was like, this doesn't feel like our next project. Like it's too big and we haven't really proven ourselves on a bigger scale to feel comfortable asking people like, look, trust us, we know what we're doing. So we always wanted something that was smaller in scale and more achievable. And it's kind of funny because the central relationship in that feature script is very similar to Sherlock and our Sherlock and Bloxon relationship in this. It's kind of, once again, it's just kind of us going back to writing about what we know, which is having this bromance that has lasted over 20 years. And
or Austin is the cold, aloof one that drives people crazy, and I care too much. No,
yeah,
you're not too far off.
Let me ask you: do you feel like by having it in the Sherlock world that it kind of gives you a jump start, like people are familiar with these characters, so we can kind of jump into the story rather than trying to establish the relationship in that world already?
Yeah. That was one factor that made us go like, this is another pro in the establish this in Sherlock world, because, well, it's no one needs to like be familiar with the original stories to feel like they understand Sherlock. It's like permeated every aspect of pop culture. And thankfully it's public domain. So that's also another nice benefit of using it. And we also just kind of it's a little more petty, but one of the reasons that I really had a hard time shifting away from Sherlock and into something totally original is that we'd already named our characters. We wanted them to be Sherlock and Bloxon, and they were that way since 2011 when we came up with it. And we're like, we like these characters and the side characters, like Mrs. Hudson and Lestrade in the original text. We have ours, Mrs. Hud and Lefrade, and we don't really go too much like beyond that with like being like devoted to every little tiny detail of Conan Doyle's stuff. It's really a launching point, but we are taking the most recognizable aspects. And if we're going to do that, we might as well lean in and just really embrace it as a retelling, a very loose, purist, run for the hills retelling of Sherlock Holmes. But we hope that it does honor a lot of the spirit of the text of just kind of what Conan Doyle is trying to say about being observant and having a purpose for why you do what you do, and all that good stuff. I'm starting to read for the first time Sherlock stories because of working on this and finding them absolutely wonderful.
So for as you're developing the story and developing the world, there's all these different facets that go into it. I can imagine one of those would be just figuring out that romance, that relationship between the two characters, and letting that flow to become, I often say, like, I know a lot of people like The Office, but it's a great example of a show that you need to watch probably a season before you start to really appreciate all the idiosyncrasies and details.
Mhm.
So there's probably some of that world building that you guys have to go through in order to establish, all right, this is how this character always reacts, and this is, this is the straight man, this is the comedian, like all these different aspects into it. Tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah, I mean, we want it to be the kind of thing where we do have those rules where we just know inherently, like, this is the driving force behind these characters. They will always look at things from this point of view, except when key event happen in the storyline, they're going to alter their, it's going to alter their worldview, and they will be kind of forever subtly changed. And so we are looking at like developments with the characters where they start in the pilot and where they end up in,
Season
as far
3.
out of season 3 where we kind of
Yeah.
mapped it, is like, yeah, there's a lot of growth, and that's what's really exciting to us as storytellers, to like really, put all our eggs into the basket, I guess, of getting this made, getting it as a long-term thing that we can kind of reap the benefits of that, those payoffs down the line. But by starting with a point that's a lot easier to digest and identify, and again, benefiting from the Sherlockian parallels, and the characters are not too far off from, what people would expect. That all really helps.
So from the show perspective, like, how long are the seasons, and where do you plan on seeing the final product being showcased?
We're trying to make the show into like a half-hour comedy show, but we're also, ideally, we'd love it to be up on a streaming network, Netflix or Hulu or something to that of that scale, and then having seasons that last anywhere between 8 to 12 episodes, depending on the thing. The thing that's great about shows nowadays is, because everything is all kind of catered to streaming, is like you don't have those rigid, this has to be an hour long and it has to be 22 episodes. You can sort of, some episodes can be longer and some shorter, depending on what the story needs to do. Some seasons are shorter or longer depending on that arc or whatever. So it's very freeing now to like just look ahead and see like, we do have a story really mapped out across 3 seasons for this thing. So it's cool to see that, but then also be like, still leave room open for whatever may come through the process of adding more people to the team and new ideas coming up, and just trying to having a vision, but also staying loose with it has been really fun.
Well, and continuing with that thought, and then this might be a Dylan question. What type of, I don't say restrictions, but the parameters have you had to hone into? I know that you're shooting on, I believe it was Blackmagic cinema cameras, and for your production, in order for it to meet whatever streaming platforms criteria, has that been part of that workflow that you've had to work around?
So we haven't really touched on that too much yet. I've looked at like what cameras are required by Netflix and stuff like that, but we don't yet have a DP. So they will definitely be involved in, like, we're using a 6K Blackmagic today, but that's not necessarily what we'll be using for the shoot. Potentially it could be. I haven't really delved that deep, and like I said, the DP probably be more the person to decide that.
The other thing that's nice is, like, we're not at the point where we're producing anything that we're going to be like obligated to distribute in like hit certain technical specs. Like, we're just making a pilot, and it's not going to, in all likelihood, be what goes to streaming. It's probably going to be what informs the show if it gets picked up, and then we'll kind of rework it and figure out a proper production process to make season 1. But hopefully it's as close as we can get to what season 1 would be.
So as using that as a jump off point, Dylan, I know that you have kind of a little taste of your workflow that you're going to take us through. So I'm going to hand that to you and show us what it's like to produce Fogtown.
Sure. Well, first of all, just real quick, I'd like to just say that one of the huge draws for me to this show was also the mystery element. I love a lot of British stuff, British mystery. Sean brought up Poirot. Love Poirot. I also love the Muppets and Monty Python and things like that. So this just really resonated with me on a creative level, not just a technical level. That's one of the reasons I was really excited about this show. We are basically using an in-display setup, using Unreal Engine and the Vive trackers. We just right now only are using the basic Vive system. I have the headset. I had the VR system before I started doing the virtual production. But I do have a complement of extra trackers. I do some motion capture stuff. So I have a full setup to do my own motion capture using Vive, which I've discovered an amazing motion capture program that's free. That's like, we can go into that at another time. That's not relevant. But so yeah, we have our LED screen, which is currently my television, 65-inch OLED. And on my computer, I'm running Unreal Engine 4.27, although I'm really seriously thinking we will be able to move up to 5 for the pilot. But that's going to take a little testing because clearly Lumen and Nanite, they sometimes have issues with LED screens and things. I'm hoping, and I've done a little bit of testing and I'm feeling optimistic, but I'm hoping because our setup is so simple that I won't run into a lot of the lag problems that are happening on bigger setups with that gear. Yeah, so Dane, did you want to give a little demo? My assistant Dane here, we've got our 6K on a Ronin, and we've had the tracking system running the whole time. So we're just going to give you a little demo, and please know that we just really set this up quickly. Not everything's perfectly calibrated. Our lights by no means are matching the way we would really want them to be, but this is just sort of a quick demo. So you want to go ahead and walk in? I'll step out. Oh, wait, we got to get our tracker started. Yeah, there you go. So there we're getting our parallax. Hopefully you can see that okay. So we've just got a little foreground set up. I've got the Fogtown sign and some foreground elements. Just kind of a basic lighting setup, real simple. I think we've only got 2 lights working right now, actually. I'm always hypercritical because lighting is one of my favorite things. So unless it's perfect, I get embarrassed.
I hear you. So for when you were setting that up, was there any issues you ran into with scale or like?
Yes. That was a major issue.
That was my fault.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't his fault.
It started with me. I mean,
Him
yeah,
and
you
his
take
6-foot
it.
tall puppets.
Yeah, you take it away, Dylan, though.
Yeah, he's filming, so you'll have that footage to cut into. Yeah, actually, scale was sort of an issue because, and this was something that I had to figure out as well. But so when Austin initially sent me the assets, I guess technically they weren't at real world scale because the real world scale, they would have been scaled to the puppets. Puppets were, I think, 21 centimeters tall. So if you extrapolate that out to like 6 feet, I think I'm doing it in feet, but normally I'm doing it in meters in the programs. But I think we ended up with a 0.9 scale. So we had to scale everything down to 0.9. Yeah, so what happens is if you don't have the proper scale, you get no parallax. Imagine if the background is full size and the foreground is miniature size. You end up moving the camera like an inch on the foreground and it moves massively, but the background you see no parallax. So a little experimentation, we realized, wow, we have to have everything scaled down. So now, can you move into the scene again? Yeah. So now everything that you see on the screen is a miniature, right? So like the maximum height of those buildings is I think like 30 centimeters or something like that. And so that's how you can get a decent amount of parallax and everything kind of matches up. We don't have it super matched right now, but we've done some testing where we've gotten it really tight and it looks nice. So I'm pretty confident that that'll work.
Take us through any of the workflow issues that you ran into with just the fact of using a television and having your puppets that close to it, probably lighting issues, reflections, that type of stuff.
It's interesting. I have been working on another project that shot we have a full-scale LED volume here in Portland now, and I've been doing environments for that. I'm not involved in the virtual production side. I'm just doing the Unreal environments. But I honestly, from my experience, feel like it's easier to shoot on an LED or on a television of this scale. I mean, you got to realize the pixel pitch on this is minute compared to like a big wall, so you can get really close, and also we can cheat depth of field and stuff like that real easy by just moving the camera and the set closer or farther from the TV. Reflections are, I mean, those are always going to be an issue. I'm a big lighting guy, as I mentioned, and it's an issue, but if you know how to flag stuff off and you're actually doing creative lighting that's, not coming straight on the actor and, gives, using a lot of edge light and things like that, it works out pretty well. I don't think we spent a massive amount of time mitigating reflections when we shot our proof of concept. I mean, we had to do some flagging and stuff, but it was not crazy. One thing is on the small scale, like the puppeteer's shadows can start to become an issue, right? So I'm hoping when we shoot the pilot that we have it sort of set up so that the puppeteers can kind of hide if they need to, and it's built for their comfort so that they can maybe stand and duck their head or what have you.
For people just kind of getting into it, would you have a recommendation? Matte screen, gloss screen, OLED? I know you said you have an your OLED screen now. Any preference for technology as far as what's kind of lended itself the best?
Well, we haven't done a ton of experimenting with different monitors yet, but definitely a matte screen. I mean, yeah, any kind of reflections, not only for reflections for the camera, but reflections because we're using an infrared Vive system. One of the issues with Vive is getting reflections interfering with your connectivity. So you really want to, in your space, wherever you're shooting, you really want to minimize reflections as much as possible. And the TV is a big reflector. I mean, so it's sort of a thing. We are hoping to get the Vive Mars. Sean and I and Austin have discussed this, and I don't know how familiar you are with that, but it's potentially coming out this month, potentially. And that would be nice because, as you may know, that really significantly helps reduce jitter. You've got gen lock, so we can kind of reduce. One issue we do have is latency. Because we're not gen locked, so we can't do a lot of really quick pans yet. The background environment just won't keep up. But I think, with the Vive and stuff, I think we can really dial it in well.
I want to ask you about lensing, because there are some shots that I saw in some of the promotions where it looked like you were kind of using a fairly wide angle lens, and I know that can be a bit of a challenge to shoot against, the TV and then have it be that wide angle. So, what kind of lenses are you using on the Blackmagic, and how has that affected the composition choices for your framing and blocking?
Well, it's interesting. I think we really started out trying to use, the natural inclination is to use a tighter lens. You want to get that whole screen, but I feel like it turned out that just the wider lenses gave us a better view, field of view, and you just push in a lot closer. But as far as lensing, we are really improvising at this point. We're trying to figure it out. What are we on right now?
So I mean, right now we're basically shooting on the equivalent of a 35 millimeter.
Right.
And like my experience with it so far has basically been that it's best to be able to switch back and forth, because you start to lose range of motion rather rapidly on a wide angle lens, and you have to cut really tight, which increases the reflections of the puppeteers and the lights, and it just makes it a lot harder to work with, but it does have the look you want.
Well, let me interrupt. There's a very practical reason too that we're shooting on that wide lens. I believe we shot completely on that for the proof of concept, and that is lens calibration. Oh my God. So we didn't calibrate all of our lenses. We got a calibration on the lens that we could, and said, this is good, we're going to use this. But we've gotten a lot better at it. I mean, we had a bunch of false starts and finally kind of nailed it down. So in our next one, whatever our next test is, we're going to test out some multiple lenses with different lens files, and that thing.
And the other great thing about doing the wider angle lenses is that it gives us more control of our or it allows us to have greater depth of field. And that's something that we struggle with a lot working at this scale against screens, is often if we don't set things up right, our backgrounds are just too blurry and we can't get more clarity out of them. And we really want to be able to see deeply into the scene and admire all the craftsmanship. And so that's one way that we can, by pushing things as close to the screen as we possibly can, widening our focal length, blasting the scene with as much light as we can get away with, and stopping down. That really helps us have that look we want, and makes it kind of look, the more we have that shallow depth of field, the more I think that even though it blurs the screen and kind of blurs some of the rough edges, it also adds an artifice where you're like, I'm looking at this with my eyes and it shouldn't be that blurry. And so that's kind of the biggest thing on a visual level for me right now, as we're just kind of navigating all of our little test shoots, just getting it to look like you would expect it to if you were there.
Yeah,
which also, oh, sorry, I was going to say, which also
well, just say it then, Austin.
It feeds back all of those technical things that you run into feed back to the design of the world itself. And what I was saying earlier, balancing that, how much energy do you put into this thing versus, is it good enough kind of thing? Because you always have to keep in mind, this will be in the background and it might be out of focus, and we're really focusing on the puppets here. So don't spend all day building this, chair and making it look super nice, because it doesn't matter. It's just, it's time wasted pretty much.
And it's the same thing with the virtual production, definitely. So with the proof of concept, we shot 2 full days, 2 big days. And on the first day, we didn't have it dialed in at all. And I actually had a lot to learn about using sequencer while we had in-display running. So I was literally hand scrolling the sequence through as opposed to letting it run. And so in the final product, there's some really janky shots in there. But it doesn't really matter because the content's so good, and you just got to realize that it's all about the whole and not just about each.
So Dylan, one more question I have. You mentioned the Mars system. Are there any other upgrades that you could see benefiting from, maybe a TV or a camera? What type of things would you like to see for when you actually move into the full production?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that you're using a projection screen. That's something I have thought about for getting some really big moves, big camera moves. Because imagine using your screen, I don't know what exactly you have, but put our little tiny set in front of that and you can really get a lot, right? So that's definitely been on my mind. If we can get our hands on a Mars, I don't know that we're going to need to upgrade farther than that as far as the camera tracking. So it's mostly, I think, the display.
My dream is to get basically, I would love it if we basically made our own little virtual production volume, but at that scale of a TV where you get like 4 TVs and put them all make a little box, open-ended box with them, and then sort of project different viewpoints from each, and it basically lights your set, and then you can supplement it with little spotlights where you need it and stuff like that. But that's my far-reaching dream thing of doing that.
Because then I, as a puppeteer, get to be trapped in a box of TVs all day long, and you get to watch them zoom and laugh.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I really we could talk all day, and we pretty much have at this point. But I really appreciate your time. But finally, I want to say, where can people find out more information about Fogtown? Your fundraiser is going on right now, so we definitely want to encourage people to check that out. Give us all the details. Where can people get more information?
We have our main website for Fogtown with a bunch of info and places to learn more is fogtownseries.com. There's a link to the crowdfunder there, but you can also do fundfogtown.com, get redirected to our campaign on Seed and Spark. It's running through the end of August. I think August 31st in the early morning is the last time to get your pledges in. And we have a bunch of pretty wacky, fun rewards on there, including ones for those who want to have their own little creative stamp put into the show in some small way. A couple that I can highlight is at $250. You get a bundle of cool stuff, but the main thing is you can record your voice doing an infernal screech, and we will take everyone who gives us one, and our sound designer will combine them into this crazy chimera, and it'll be the sound effect that is used for the roar of a moth god in a key storytelling sequence of the episode. So you probably will not be able to recognize yourself, but you will know that you are in there. And at I think it's $1,000. We're doing lots and lots of BTS stuff, just tons of just video documentaries about what it's like on set. We will make for $1,000 backers, we'll make t-shirts for the crew that have, whoever's face or photo or what they have rights to, and even a quote, and we'll wear it and we'll show up in these documentaries with that in confounding, befuddling, silly ways. So awesome. Lots of fun stuff like that over at fundfogtown.com.
Awesome.
Fantastic.
Well, thanks so much for your time. I'm excited to see where this show goes, and we appreciate you showing us a little bit of behind the scenes of the magic.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Appreciate you having us here. This is great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.